Dembani bini ya domani kudumu.
You're watching LUNTHA TV and it's time for our 7:30 news bulletin. My name is Tandi Zumara. First, the headlines. Pope Leo XIV laments use of aircraft as carriers of death and destruction in theatres of war. Minister of Finance praises members of Parliament as 10.9 trillion Malaigwaja budget secures approval. Study reveals men account for 60% of tuberculosis cases compared to women. And in other news, International Monetary Fund plans Mozambique visit as debt pressures mount and domestic financing reaches limits. We do have the details to these stories and more. Just stay with us. Pope Leo XIV has condemned the continued use of aerial bombardment, saying it should have been eliminated after the tragic experiences of the 20th century. Speaking on Monday during an audience with the airline executives and staff, the pontiff lamented that despite technological advancement, such developments are still being used to fuel war. He stressed that this does not represent progress, but rather a step backward. We have more details in this EWTN report read by Charity Chilanga.
The Pope, speaking to representatives of Italy's national airline, ITA Airways, along with a delegation from the LUNTHA group, emphasized that aviation must serve peace rather than conflict, stressing that no one should live in fear of death and destruction coming from the sky. The Holy Father also underscored the importance of fostering peace through global travel and cooperation. The audience highlighted the long-standing relationship between the papacy and Italy's national airline, dating back to St. Paul VI historic 1964 pilgrimage to the Holy Land, the first papal journey by air. Since then, successive popes have continued the tradition of international apostolic travel. The Pope noted that he himself plans to rely on ITA Airways for the upcoming trip to Africa in about 20 days. Reflecting on papal travel more broadly, he described the papal flights as powerful symbols of the mission of the successors of Peter in the modern age, noting that during apostolic journeys, the Pope presents himself as a messenger of peace. He added that such journeys should serve as bridges of dialogue, encounter, and brotherhood. He also praised airline personnel for their professionalism and spirit of service. He praised his predecessors and their collaborators for finding in the personnel of Alitalia and ITA not only skilled and experienced professionals, but also individuals who foster a serene, almost family-like atmosphere where respect is closely linked with dedication.
Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Decentralization Joseph Mwanamveka has hailed members of Parliament for their commitment and unity as they approved the 10.978 trillion Malawi Kwacha 2026-2027 national budget. Speaking in Parliament on Tuesday, Mwanamveka said the budget was thoroughly reviewed at committee level over 2 weeks, giving legislators a clear understanding of the financial plan. Prior to its adoption, the House, sitting as the Committee of Supply, scrutinized the approved all 59 votes contained in the budget statement. We have more details in this report filed by Patrick Pupa.
Members of Parliament have passed the 2026-2027 national budget following a voting session. The approval came as lawmakers concluded deliberations on various pieces of legislation aimed at strengthening governance, public administration, and service delivery in the country. In his remarks after the budget passed, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Decentralization Joseph Mwanamveka commended MPs for their diligence, noting that their cooperation ensured the budget responds to the priorities of Malawians. He emphasized that the collaborative approach during deliberations reflected Parliament's commitment to governance and socio-economic progress, signaling a productive sitting that laid the foundation for impactful reforms.
So we have recorded most of the issues that were advised to us, and I want to assure to the nation that we will take them into account and make sure that this budget is really implemented properly and to the benefit of Malawians. And in addition to that, I also want to ensure that for this budget to be implemented, there is need for oversight. And the oversight is not only Parliament. Even the people in the constituency have a role to play. The chiefs have a role to play.
The approved budget covers key sectors, including agriculture, health, education, and infrastructure, with allocations focused on boosting productivity, improving service delivery, and driving economic growth. For LUNTHA News at Parliament, this is Patrick Pupa.
African Institute for Development Policy (AFDEP) Executive Director Siapazi Zulu has revealed that men bear a higher burden of tuberculosis (TB), accounting for 60% of the cases compared to women. Zulu made these remarks on Tuesday in Lilongwe during this year's World TB and Leprosy Day commemoration organized by the National TB and Leprosy Elimination Program. Siapazi Zulu explained that findings from a 6-year study by AFDEP show that many men are reluctant to seek medical attention, a behavior that puts them at greater risk of contracting and spreading the disease. Bridget Manoka has filed this report.
Zulu emphasized the need for targeted interventions focusing on men, including increased awareness, routine screening, and improved access to treatment services. He stressed that addressing these gaps is critical in the fight against TB and in achieving national and global targets to eliminate the disease.
Look at how do we really accelerate progress in ending TB by 2030. And when you look at research evidence, it shows that men are more likely to be infected, less likely to be diagnosed, and less likely even to finish treatment when they are infected. So the program has really been looking at men as a special vulnerable group to come up with interventions on how to target them better, how to put them on treatment, and how to help them finish treatment.
The guest of honor at the event, Secretary of Health and Sanitation, Dr. Dani Namarika, has advised men to seek medical attention early so that efforts to fight the disease can be successful and to prevent cases of drug-resistant tuberculosis.
70 out of every 100 were TB, HIV co-infection. This time round, we have 45 per 100 patients with TB, HIV co-infection. So significant progress has been made, but the numbers are still high. and we're still losing out on men. So men are our largest culprits in terms of numbers and percentages. Unfortunately, the men are not forthcoming in their uptake of healthcare services in terms of diagnosis and treatment.
This year's World Tuberculosis Day is being commemorated under the theme, Yes, We Can End TB, Commit, Invest, Deliver. Bridget Manoka, for LUNTHA News.
The Ministry of Justice has revealed that it is stepping up efforts to improve access to justice for women and children in conflict with the law. Minister of Justice Charles Muhango made these remarks on Tuesday at Capitol Hill in Lilongwe during a meeting with delegations from the International Justice Mission, IJM. We have more details in this report by Alice Chizombe.
Muhango expressed concern over persistent infrastructure gaps, noting that some districts still lack women's prisons. In areas such as Karanga, female inmates are transferred to Chitipa. A development authorities say disrupts access to justice and support systems. Muhango pledged to engage relevant stakeholders to address these challenges nationwide and called on IJM to introduce programs aimed at improving access to justice, particularly through capacity building for police officers and officials in the Ministry of Gender.
Women and children, and especially access to justice, which exposed some strengths and some gaps in the system. And one of the issues that was exposed there was access to justice by women and children. And we have identified several areas that we can collaborate with them and the government. One of the issues that we raised was capacity building, especially for magistrate courts.
IGM Program Director Simon Marning reaffirmed the organization's commitment to working with the Malawi government to ensure that vulnerable groups, including women and children, receive justice. Marning noted that access to justice remains a significant challenge in Malawi, despite ongoing efforts, stating that 2022 findings still reflect the current situation, with many Malawians, especially women and children, continuing to face barriers in accessing justice services.
Over the course of our program, which is aiming to strengthen the justice system for the protection of women and children against violence, we hope to bring a number of interventions and to take some time actually to develop a comprehensive strategy. But I would emphasize what the Minister has already highlighted in terms of capacity development, and particularly around what we would call trauma-informed approaches to justice. The capacity that all public-facing aspects of the justice system are able to deal with women, deal with children who have suffered crimes in the most appropriate way.
The International Justice Mission is a global non-governmental organization founded in 1997, dedicated to protecting vulnerable people from violence, exploitation, and modern-day slavery. Reporting for LUNTHA News in Lilongwe, this is Alice Chizombe.
Remember that you're watching news coming to you live from Bishop Navy Media Center, and today you're with me, Tandio and Zumara. Before we proceed, let's have another look at the headlines. Pope Leo XIV laments use of aircraft as carriers of death and destruction in theaters of war. Minister of Finance praises members of Parliament as 10.9 trillion Malawi Kwacha budget secures approval. Study reveals men account for 60% of tuberculosis cases compared to women. And in other news, International Monetary Fund plans Mozambique visit as debt pressures mount and domestic financing reaches limits. Proceeding with the news, the National Oil Company of Malawi, NOCMA, has said it is complementing emergency response efforts with long-term interventions aimed at reducing the impact of disasters in the country. NOCMA Director of Finance Sophia Mkandawire says the company is implementing initiatives such as tree planting alongside immediate relief support to help build resilience in communities. She made these remarks on Tuesday at Capitol Hill in Lilongwe during the handover of a 200 million Malawi kwacha donation to the Department of Disaster Management Affairs DODMA for flood response. We have more details in this report filed by Gift Kalonga.
Mkandawire said the donation forms part of the company's social and moral responsibility to support Malawians affected by disasters. She said NOCMA believes sustainable solutions are key to addressing the recurring impact of floods and other natural shocks.
Because we are fellow Malawians, so whatever is happening in this country, we hear about it because we are in this country. So we have a social responsibility, we have a moral responsibility to respond to issues that affect any one of us.
Commissioner for the Department of Disaster Management Affairs, Wilson Morin, said the support comes at a time when the department is facing significant resource gap in responding to the effects of floods. Morin said since March 15, about 39,000 households have been affected by heavy rains, with 29 deaths and 142 injuries recorded. He said the department is currently conducting assessments and distributing relief items to affected communities. Morin commended NOCMA for the timely intervention, saying the contribution will assist in providing both food and non-food items.
Department, we've been going around doing the assessments, distributing relief items to those affected. We do have a resource gap, and the donation done by NOCMA has come at the right time. We need relief items, we need food and non-food items for the affected households, and therefore we really appreciate this donation that has come from NOCMA to the Department of Disaster Management Affairs.
Meanwhile, DODMA says it requires about 17 billion kwacha for relief and recovery interventions and is planning to construct resilient houses to withstand future disasters. For LUNTHA News in Lilongwe, this is Gift Kalonga.
The Center for Democracy and Economic Development Initiative, CIDED, has raised alarm over what it describes as deep-rooted inefficiencies and ballooning liabilities in Malawi's fuel sector, warning that the situation poses a serious economic risk if not urgently addressed. CIDED Executive Director Sylvester Namiwa said the country's fuel challenges are largely driven by internal structural failures rather than external factors. Speaking at a press briefing in Blantyre on Tuesday, Namiwa stressed that authorities must prioritize fixing inefficiencies within the system before attributing supply problems to global issues such as the Middle East conflict. We have more details on this report filed by Constance Kamdimeni.
Namiwa pointed to what he called alarming financial obligations within the sector, claiming that the Malawi Energy Regulatory Authority MERA, together with other players, is burdened with liabilities exceeding 1.2 trillion kwacha in levies and under-recoveries. He warned that the growing debt could further strain the economy and worsen fuel instability if left unchecked. Namiwa has since called on Parliament's Public Appointment Committee to summon the former MERA board to account for its decision to abandon the automatic fuel pricing mechanism, a move he says contributed to the accumulation of liabilities and higher fuel costs. He also criticized a lack of transparency in fuel procurement, alleging that the use of middlemen is inflating pump prices, and questioned the effectiveness of the 28% ethanol blend.
The Public Appointments Committee should summon the recent past MERA board to exonerate themselves for criminal negligence by simply abandoning the automatic pricing mechanism of fuel that saw Malawians paying 41% in fuel hike. That was done against the law. Demand this government to be transparent in all fuel procurement deals.
Meanwhile, authorities are yet to respond to the concerns raised by the seeded. For LUNTHA News, this is Constance Kamtemin.
Now, in international news, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, will visit Mozambique in the coming months as the Southern African nation seeks help, shoring up its increasingly strained finances and grapples with mounting public debt. Mozambique's sovereign spread, the premium investors' demand to hold its hard currency debt over United States treasuries, traded at 1,304 basis points on Tuesday, a level typically associated with severe financial distress, data from JP Morgan showed. We have more details in this Reuters report read by Charity Chilanga.
Mozambique's previous IMF program ended prematurely in April 2025, and the government has been in talks with the lender of last resort for a new one. Discussions are expected during the IMF and World Bank Springs meeting in Washington in April, the fund said on Monday in response to questions from Reuters. Mozambique's debt problems date back to a 2016 hidden debt scandal, which wrecked investor confidence and kept access to funding. Delays to major gas projects that had been expected to boost exports, revenues, and government finances have made matters worse. A debt report released last week by the Finance Ministry pointed to mounting fiscal strain. Public debt rose 6.8% in 2025 to 474.0 billion metakay, which is 7.49 billion United States dollars. Central bank advances in the form of short-term loans to the government to cover budget shortfalls, meanwhile surged 176.1% over the year to 49.6 billion metakay, equivalent to 10.5% of domestic debt at year-end. A sharp rise in central bank financing often signals stress in normal funding channels. In Africa, Ghana's central bank overdrafts eventually contributed to a full debt restructuring, while Nigeria converted a large volume of central bank lending into a long-term bonds. The IMF, in its latest annual review of Mozambique, noted that domestic banks, the primary buyers of government debt, have reached their appetite limits, while net external financing has turned negative, indicating that outflows now exceed net inflows.
And that report also brings us to the end of what we have for you in this edition of our news bulletin. But before we go, here's a reminder of the headlines. Pope Leo XIV laments use of aircraft as carriers of death and destruction in theaters of war. Minister of Finance praises members of Parliament as 10.9 trillion Malawi Kwacha budget secures approval. Study reveals men account for 60% of tuberculosis cases compared to women. And in other news, International Monetary Fund plans Mozambique visit as debt pressures mount and domestic financing reaches limits. My name is Tandi Wimzumara. Thank you so much for keeping me company, and do continue following the rest of our programs right here on LUNTHA TV. Goodbye for now, and do stay safe.